Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I'm walking home. I'm Brendan Riley. Good afternoon, listeners. It is a gorgeous spring day here in suburban Chicago. The sun is out, the sky is blue, and I have 2 more days until the end of the semester. Oodalali, I am looking forward to summer. I've started on a new health kick. I am watching my food better and trying to keep my diet strong. So I think one of the ways I'm going to try to encourage myself to keep this podcast going is that I'll be taking walks regularly even after the semester ends, and I'll use some of that opportunity to record this podcast, because I know it would throw you off if suddenly I had it without all this background noise and without me huffing and puffing and without the rhythmic thump of my big old feet. So in another update, I also had to replace the linings on my shoes. These are hiking shoes that I bought a while ago, actually at the beginning of the school year, because I was going to be walking so much. I knew I needed to get comfy shoes. And the other day they were feeling bad, so I looked, and sure enough, I'd torn through the bottom of the lining. So I had to buy new liners, which I know you're excited to know about. So on today's episode of Pick Up and Deliver, I wanted to talk about something sparked by this weekend's gameplays. My group of gamers and I, my wife, my daughter, and 2 friends and I have been working our way through Pandemic Legacy. Our usual practice is that the other 4 people I mentioned will play the different parts, and I act as kind of moderator / card turner over / extra rules observer, that sort of thing. So if you haven't played Pandemic Legacy, it's like the original game Pandemic in that you're trying to stop a virus from destroying the world. Only in Pandemic Legacy, there is a complicated plot that emerges as you play. The board is changed with stickers, cards are changed with markers, or by destroying them, you get to tear up cards. We're actually playing, and then as plot events emerge, you get to open packages and you get to open envelopes and put stickers on things. It's great fun. We're actually playing Season 2, which changes the game dramatically. If you have played regular Pandemic Legacy Season 1 will seem very familiar. Season 2 is pretty different. It feels like it's definitely a descendant of the original Pandemic game, but it's different enough that it feels different, although it certainly is in the same wheelhouse. So we've been playing Pandemic Legacy Season 2, and we generally try to play 2 games per session, and we try to play once a month. So generally we will progress 1 or 2 months each gaming session, and we progress that way. Well, the last 4 games of Pandemic Legacy we have lost. So we've now played 7 games of Pandemic Legacy Season 2, and we've lost 5 of them. We lost the first one, then we won 2, and we've lost 4 in a row. Now this triggers a couple things. One, quite a bit of frustration. To lose 2 whole months in a row, all of March and all of April we lost. It was very frustrating. Even worse, we really felt like we understood what we were supposed to be doing, and we thought we had a handle on it in the second game in April. We thought we were going to win that one, and we lost anyway. It's possible you could kind of trigger that up to bad luck. There is a significant element of luck in Pandemic, but boy howdy, it felt like we were getting kicked in the face, and losing that 4th game was really rough. So it led me to a couple things to talk about today. Particularly, my subject for the day is punishing games. Punishing is a word that board game reviewers tend to use a lot when they talk about games that are particularly difficult if you aren't careful in how you play them. Generally, I will hear a game be described as punishing if the penalty for making a bad judgment call is steep, or if winning the game is very difficult and losing the game is very easy. The term punishing gets thrown around. So I want to talk a little bit today about, as is always the case, 3 different kinds of punishing games and what some examples of them that I enjoy and why I enjoy them. So I'm actually going to wait on the full-on punishing, because I think there are punishing competitive games, there's punishing cooperative games, and then there's a category I will call mean games, and I say that like I'm the only one who uses it. Mean is another term that gets thrown around a lot, and I think mean and punishing have a significant overlap in terms of meaning, but are not the same. So I want to talk a little bit about mean games first, and then we'll talk about punishing co-ops and punishing competitive games. So a mean game is kind of like a punishing game, a game where you can be really wrecked pretty easily and have your game just go very strongly awry. In particular, I would say a mean game is one where it's an opponent who does something to make you have that problem. Maybe you make a simple slip and your opponent takes advantage of it, or maybe the game is actually built in a way that allows them to just go after you in a really aggressive way. But games that are mean are generally, the experience can be very frustrating. If you're not somebody if you don't go into the game knowing it could be mean, or you aren't somebody who enjoys a game that involves that kind of competitiveness, mean games, I think, are going to be the highest unsatisfying games. The 3 that I wanted to highlight here, so for each of these categories, I've got 3 examples, and then one game that I've heard fits this example, but I haven't played myself. So I would say the granddaddy of mean games is Munchkin. And this is probably why people don't like Munchkin. So Munchkin is a particularly mean game because as you play, your goal is to get to level 10, but other players can basically play cards against you whenever they want. And so the further ahead you get, the more actively you get attacked by other players. It makes the game take a long time, but also can feel very mean. Feel like all the work you did just gets undone. And it kind of becomes a war of attrition that a lot of people don't enjoy. The second game I would point to as perhaps meaner is Dead of Winter. And Dead of Winter is a mostly cooperative game. It's a semi-co-op. Each player has their own secret objective that they're trying to resolve, which makes it difficult to tell what everyone's motives are because they're acting shifty. Their secret motive might be they have to stockpile 5 medicine. And if they don't have 5 medicine at the end of the game, they lose. But the group also needs medicine to, say, win a mission. And so in Dead of Winter, you could have somebody who seems to be actively fighting against or going against the group's goal, but in fact, they're just trying to help themselves win their own personal goal as well. Then on top of it, there can be somebody who actually does want to go against the group's goal, a traitor, which is what makes the other thing seem suspicious, so you might end up feeling like a traitor. And in my experience, that game feels really mean because you have somebody who seems to be working for you, and then they betray you. In particular, I found it really mean to be the traitor. I did not like it. I would say any game that allows for significant levels of betrayal, something like, or any game that would allow for significant levels of betrayal would fit into this category. And then the third one, I would say the meanest of the mean games is City of Horror. City of Horror, you have characters that are trying to survive a zombie outbreak. And basically, you take turns voting to throw the other person's characters out. It is incredibly aggressive and incredibly backstabby. Now this is a whole category of games. There's Cutthroat Caverns is supposed to be pretty backstabby. Famously, Game of Thrones and Diplomacy are incredibly difficult or mean that way. So I would say mean games are kind of punishing in that if you're not somebody who takes to that sort of gameplay, it's going to be very difficult to pull off those sort of winning maneuvers, and you're usually going to be the stabby rather than the stabber. So that's the first kind of punishing game. I would say mean games. second kind of punishing game I wanted to call attention to were punishing competitive games. Now, I think punishing gets used more often to describe co-ops because competitive games, it's generally seen like the other players are the ones you're competing with, but there are some games where the things you have to do are so tightly controlled or tightly restricted that your ability to pull them off is already really hard, and then you have people competing with you. So the three... regarding meme games, I forgot to mention, the meme game I haven't played that I would mention as supposedly very mean is Arboretum. Supposedly a nice game about planting trees, and then it turns out that it's incredibly mean. Almost every review of Arboretum I've listened to describes it as really mean. So, take that for what you will. Okay, back to the games with punishing mechanisms. So generally this is going to be a game with a really tight economy. The three that I would point to as really punishing, the first is Power Grid. Power Grid is a very mathy game, but again, can be very punishing if you're not careful with your money. You run out of money, you can't fund any of your power stations, and it just gets really tough. The second one is perhaps even more famous for being difficult that way, and that is Brass, the Martin Wallace game. You could almost put all of Martin Wallace economic games in there. You know, London with its punishing poverty cubes, Brass with its loans and very, very tight economy. Now, I'm talking about the old Brass, or what's now called Brass Lancashire. The new Brass Manchester sounds like it's a bit more free or a bit more fun. I have to say the review Shut Up and Sit Down just did about the Brass things, or their mentions of them on the podcast, make me really want to go get those new Roxley editions. But anyway, and then the third one is the most famous of the punishing games, and that's Agricola. Because in Agricola, you have to make sure you have enough food to feed your people. And if you don't, you have to take starvation cards, which hurt your score at the end. And some people find this so grindy, they call it Misery Farm as the name for Agricola. So I understand that. And then one apparently very punishing game that I haven't played is Year of the Dragon, the Stefan Feld game about running a market in China, I think. And that game has these really brutal event cards that you can see coming, but they still just make it very hard to make progress or improve in that game. So that's Year of the Dragon. And then, like I said, I think the most common use of the term punishing is in descriptions of cooperative games. So as you're learning to play games where you're working with other people, if the game itself is your competitor, then the system of the game should be reasonably challenging in order for you to win. This is, of course, what started me off on this. Pandemic Legacy Season 2 is proving to be difficult for us. But the three difficult games I would point to in this regard are Death Angel, the card game, or the dice game. It's mostly a dice and card game. It's mostly a dice game. You use cards to do your figures, but then you use dice to do stuff. It's from Fantasy Flight, and it's themed in the Warhammer universe, but it is really hard. And it's, there's not a lot of strategy to it because you roll the dice. And if your dice rolls come up badly, which they usually do, then you die. But there's some strategy, and it's a fun little card game, Death Angel. I only have one other one. I mean, Pandemic itself tends to be kind of punishing if you run it on the epic level. So I guess we could put Pandemic there. But I would say the two honorable mentions that I have not had a chance to play yet. One of them is Robinson Crusoe, a famously punishing co-op game where it's very easy to get poisoned and die. And then the other one is Xenoshift, which is a tower defense game from Cool Mini or Not that apparently is very difficult. There's some people who talk about never winning that game or having a lot of trouble. But a famously difficult co-op game is Ghost Stories. Ghost Stories is a co-op game where you're trying to fight off ghosts in feudal Japan and probably dying while you do so. Really fun. So that brings me to the end of my walk and the end of my list for punishing games. I'm curious, what games do you find punishing? Are there ones I missed that you think are really fun? Pop over to our BoardGameGeek forum. I believe that it's Guild 3269. And drop in and let us know what you think of punishing games. Do you like to play them? Which are your favorites? Which ones have I forgotten? Thanks for joining me on the walk today. I hope that you'll tune in future. And until then, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Hi. So Munchkin is a game where you're trying to adventure through a dungeon, you're gaining experience and treasure, and in the end okay, I'm gonna stop.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.